as we join Christian and his friend Hopeful once again on their journey to the celestial city. They leave the delectable mountains, and soon after they meet a man with the name Ignorance. He tells them that he is from the country of Conceit, and he enters the path not through the narrow gate, but by way of a crooked lane. Christian and Hopeful fall into conversation with this man, Ignorance, and they warn him that if he is not entered by the narrow gate, then he will not be allowed to enter the celestial city. But ignoring what they say, Ignorance insists that as a result of his own good works, surely he will be allowed in. And so he says, I know my Lord's will and have lived a good life. I pay every man his due. I pray, fast, pay tithes, and give alms. He sounds a lot like the Pharisee in the parable that Jesus told of the Pharisee and the tax collector, the man who trusted in himself that he was righteous. And he says to Christian and Hopeful, you be content to follow the religion of your country, and I will follow the religion of mine. I trust that all will be well for each of us. Well, Christian and Hopeful realize that there is no point arguing with this man. They decide to let him think for a while about what they've already said, and they will talk to him again at a later date, as we shall see in a few chapters' time. So the two pilgrims went on, and Ignorance followed after them. And next they enter a very dark lane, and they see a man there who is in a desperate situation. 7 devils had bound him up with 7 strong cords, and they were carrying him away to the doorway that they had previously seen in the side of the hill. If you remember, that doorway led to a byway to hell, and it was a byway along which many in the past had travelled. People such as Judas Iscariot and Ananias and Sapphira. And it represents a false profession of faith which cannot save and which leads to destruction. And this is where this poor man is being taken. There is a placard on his back with the inscription, debauched professor and damnable apostate. And all of this reminds Christian of a story that he'd heard in the past about this dark lane where they currently find themselves. It's the story of 2 men called Little Faith and Great Grace. Little Faith is a true believer. He's a fellow pilgrim, but his faith is weak and feeble. And when he had to go down this dark lane, he found himself facing great trouble. 3 thugs who were brothers came and assaulted him and stole from him. The 3 brothers were named Faint Heart, Mistrust, and Guilt. And Little Faith just couldn't stand up against them. They easily overpowered him. They attacked him and beat him and robbed him of many of his riches. And thereafter, Little Faith struggled on in his journey with great sadness and pity. But in contrast to that, another man also walked down this dark lane, and he was called Great Grace. Again, he's a true believer, he's a fellow pilgrim, but he was a strong, mature Christian with a robust faith. And when he walked down that dark lane, those 3 thugs, Faint Heart and Mistrust and Guilt, fled the scene. And there are various lessons that Bunyan is teaching us by including this story of Little Faith and Great Grace. Firstly, notice this: even little faith endures. Yes, little faith suffered greatly at the hands of faint heart and mistrust and guilt. Because of the weakness of his faith, he found himself severely assaulted by these things, and he was robbed of his joy, and he had to struggle on for the rest of his journey, but struggle on he did. And though faint heart and mistrust and guilt left him beaten and bruised, despondent and discouraged, they were not able to steal from him his most precious possession. And so Hopeful comments, it is a wonder that they did not get his certificate from him, by which he would receive admittance at the celestial gate. And Christian replies, yes, it is a wonder, though they did not get it through any cleverness on his part. For he, being bewildered by their coming upon him so quickly, had neither power nor skill to hide anything. So it was more by good providence than by any wise endeavour on his part that they did not rob him of his certificate. And the point is, even little faith endures. Even those whose faith is weak and small and feeble, and who as a result find themselves severely assaulted by guilt and mistrust and faintness of heart, they will make it to the celestial city. There are some Christians who will limp all the way to heaven, and yet by God's good providence they will get there in the end. Even little faith endures. But as well as that, notice this: even great grace is vulnerable. And as they continue to talk about this story, Hopeful asks, wouldn't it have been much better if little faith had been more like the other man, great grace? And Christian acknowledges, yes, of course it would have been. And he says, I trust that you will see some difference between little faith and the King's champion, that is great grace. Some are strong, some are weak. Some have great faith, some have little faith. And of course, it is much better to be equipped with a strong faith rather than to struggle with a weak faith. Those of stronger faith are less troubled by those feelings of faintness of heart, mistrust, guilt. And needless to say, we should want our faith to grow and to become stronger. We should make the best use of all of the means that God has given to us so that our faith will develop and progress and become stronger. We should be like that man Jesus met who said, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. And yet there is a word of caution here, because Christian reminds Hopeful that even great grace is vulnerable. And so he says, though great grace is excellent at his weapons, and has and can, so long as he keeps them at sword's point, do well enough with them, yet if faint heart, mistrust, or guilt get within his heart, they will be able to throw him down. Whoever looks closely upon great grace's face shall see those scars and cuts there which demonstrate what I am saying. Even this man, great grace, a strong, mature believer, has had to fight hard against these things. He has the scars to prove it. And to underline this point further, Christian reminds Hopeful of certain characters from the Bible. King David, King Hezekiah, the Apostle Peter, and others. Men of great grace, men of strong faith, and yet who stumbled from time to time because of faintness of heart, or mistrust, or guilt. So notice the encouragement and the warning in this story. Even little faith endures, but even great grace is vulnerable. And so as they reflect on this story, Christian and hopeful decide there are two things they must do. First, they must put on the armour of God, and especially the shield of faith. Christian says, we must go out with our armour on and be sure to take our shield with us. It is for lack of this that many pilgrims are foiled. Only the shield of faith can quench the fiery darts of the wicked one. And secondly, they must walk closely with Jesus. So Christian continues, secondly, it is good also that we ask the King for a guide as we journey. Yes, that he himself would go with us. If he will but go with us, then we will not be afraid of tens of thousands who set themselves against us. But without him, we will only stumble along or lie among the dead. When you find yourself, as it were, walking down that dark lane where you are attacked by faintness of heart or mistrust or guilt, remember the lessons from this story. Remember that even little faith will endure, but even great grace is vulnerable. And so take up the shield of faith and walk closely with Jesus. Well, the journey continues, and Christian and hopeful now come to a fork in the road. And both roads go ahead in pretty much the same direction. At first glance, there is very little to distinguish between them. They don't know which way to turn. And then along comes a man who is dressed in a white robe. There is something angelic about his appearance. And he tells them to follow him down one of these roads. However, gradually at first, but then more and more so, this road turns them away from the right path. And Christian and hopeful then become ensnared in a net. They cannot get themselves out of it. They're trapped. And then the white robe falls away from this man. And it turns out that despite his angelic appearance, there is actually something demonic about this man. He's called the flatterer. He is a false teacher. The Apostle Paul says to the Corinthians, "For even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness." And the road that he led them down was not easy at first to distinguish from the true path. False teaching can be very subtle, can be very convincing. As many people have put it, true discernment is not just spotting the difference between what is true and what is false, but it's telling the difference between what is true and what is almost true. And that's what Christian and hopeful failed to do. And so they were led down this wrong path. They ended up ensnared by the false teacher, the flatterer. And so what do Christian and hopeful need in this predicament? Well, they need three things. Firstly, they need to be set free by Christ's grace. They can't get themselves free from this net. But then along comes a shining one, and it is Christ himself coming to them in his grace, and he sets them free. When we find ourselves ensnared and trapped by false teaching and error, whatever it may be, we need to be set free by Christ's grace. And secondly, they need to listen to Christ's word. And having set them free, Christ then speaks to them and asks, did the shepherds in the delectable mountains not give to them a note with directions to follow? And rather sheepishly, Christian and hopeful say, yes, they did receive such a note. They just forgotten to read it. Now remember, the shepherds in the delectable mountains represented ministers and elders who teach and preach the word of God to the people. And if only Christian and hopeful had paid attention to that, they would not have been so easily led astray. We need to listen to Christ's word as it's read, as it's preached, so that we will not be led astray by false teaching, however convincing it might at first appear. And then thirdly, they need to undergo Christ's discipline. And we read that this shining one, Christ himself, commanded the pilgrims to lie down. Having done this, he grievously chastised them to teach them the good way in which they should walk. As he chastised them, he declared, "As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Be zealous, therefore, and repent." The writer to the Hebrews says, "He disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness." For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. This is a threefold remedy for those who have been led astray, those who have become ensnared by false teaching. We need to be set free by Christ's grace. We need to listen to Christ's word. And at times we need to undergo Christ's discipline that we might journey safely on.